Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Introduction to Critical Race Theory in Discourse Analysis. Critical race theory, CRT, provides a crucial lens through which to explore and understand the intricate dynamics of race, racism, and power within legal and societal structures. Originating in the mid-1970s, CRT emerged from a need to address the shortcomings of traditional civil rights approaches that failed to capture the persistent and nuanced forms of racism in the United States. By integrating the perspectives of radical legal scholarship with theories of racial inequality, CRT offers a framework that challenges conventional notions of race and justice, aiming to reveal and dismantle systemic inequities embedded within the fabric of society. 1. Definition and origins. Critical race theory, CRT, is an intellectual and social movement that aims to examine and challenge the ways in which race and racism intersect with law and societal structures to perpetuate systemic inequality. Originating in the United States during the mid-1970s, CRT developed primarily within the field of legal studies, emerging as a response to perceived inadequacies in the conventional civil rights discourse that scholars and activists felt did not fully address the subtleties and persistence of racism in post-civil rights America. 1. Definition of critical race theory. Critical race theory is a framework that combines radical approaches to legal reform with theories of racial inequality, identity, and power. It emphasizes that racism is not a bygone relic of the past but a pervasive and enduring component of contemporary society embedded in laws, cultural norms, and institutional behaviors. CRT challenges the dominant liberal approaches to racial justice that stress incremental change and argues that these approaches often reinforce systemic inequalities by failing to address the deeper structural and material conditions that sustain racial disparities. 2. Origins of critical race theory. Legal studies roots. CRT originated in the United States in the late 1970s and early 1980s as a reaction to slow progress in civil rights reforms. Legal scholars like Derek Bell, Kimberlé Crenshaw, and Richard Delgado are considered pioneers in the movement. They critiqued the slow pace of racial reform in the legal system and questioned the adequacy of liberal legal tools to combat deep-seated racial inequality. Influence of critical legal studies. CRT was influenced by critical legal studies, CLS, a movement that questioned the objectivity of the law and argued that law is inherently political. CRT scholars adopted this critical approach but focused specifically on race, arguing that law plays a role in structuring racial power. Reaction to colorblindness. A significant impetus for CRT's emergence was frustration with the prevailing, colorblind, approaches to jurisprudence and policymaking that emerged after the civil rights movement. CRT scholars argue that colorblindness serves to obscure and perpetuate racial inequities under the guise of neutrality. 3. Conceptual framework. Intersecting identities. CRT holds that race intersects with other identities including gender, class, and sexuality, to produce complex configurations of advantage and disadvantage. This intersectionality, a term coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw, is central to CRT's analysis, emphasizing that anti-discrimination efforts must consider multiple and intersecting forms of identity to be effective. Narrative and counter-narrative. Storytelling and narrative analysis are vital components of CRT. Scholars use narrative to challenge dominant cultural narratives that contribute to racial stereotyping and marginalization. By elevating the voices and experiences of racial minorities, CRT seeks to construct counter-narratives that more accurately depict the realities of racial oppression. Commitment to social justice. CRT is inherently normative and activist. It not only seeks to understand the relationship between law, race, and power but also aims to transform society for the better by eliminating racial oppression and achieving racial justice. The emergence of critical race theory in discourse analysis provides a robust methodological and theoretical approach for examining how race and racism are articulated and manifested in various discourses. By understanding its roots and conceptual frameworks, scholars can more effectively use CRT to interrogate and dismantle racial inequalities in both legal and broader societal contexts. 2. The application of CRT principles to discourse analysis. The application of critical race theory, CRT, principles to discourse analysis enhances our understanding of how language constructs and maintains racial identities and power dynamics. CRT's focus on examining systemic racism through various social structures makes it a powerful framework for analyzing discourse, particularly in how language perpetuates or challenges racial inequalities. This approach is particularly insightful in examining the nuances and implications of language used in racial discussions across different contexts: media, law, education, and everyday interactions. 1. Key principles of CRT in discourse analysis. Language as a construct of reality. CRT posits that language is not merely a tool for communication but an active participant in constructing social reality. Discourse analysis from a CRT perspective examines how language shapes perceptions of race and identity, forms societal norms, and either maintains or challenges existing power structures. For example, the analysis might focus on how certain terms, narratives, or dialogue frames in media discourse perpetuate stereotypes or marginalize minority voices. Power dynamics embedded in language. Language is a medium through which power relations are negotiated and expressed. CRT encourages the scrutiny of who speaks, who is spoken about, and who is silenced within racial discussions. This involves analyzing how textual and spoken language reinforces the authority of dominant groups over marginalized ones. Discourse analysis might explore legislative debates, educational curricula, or public policy discussions to uncover the underlying power dynamics that influence racial categorizations and policies. Counter-narrative as a tool for empowerment. One of CRT's significant contributions to discourse analysis is the emphasis on counter-narratives. CRT scholars use this tool to challenge dominant narratives that often marginalize or misrepresent minority experiences. By bringing forward the voices and stories of those typically excluded from mainstream discourse, CRT helps to construct alternative perspectives that can challenge and reshape the collective understanding of race and racism. In practice, this might involve collecting and analyzing the testimonies and narratives of racial minorities to highlight disparities or injustices that are not apparent in mainstream discourse. Intersectionality and contextuality. CRT recognizes that discussions of race are incomplete without considering how race intersects with other identities such as gender, class, and sexuality. This intersectional approach is crucial in discourse analysis as it allows for a more nuanced understanding of how various forms of inequality are interconnected and manifested in language. Analyzing speeches, public statements, or social media can reveal how discourse varies across different contexts and how racial issues are portrayed in relation to other social identities. 2. Applying CRT to discourse analysis. Media representation. CRT can guide the analysis of racial representation in the media, examining how news outlets frame stories about different racial groups, which narratives are amplified, and which are suppressed. Educational discourse. In education, applying CRT principles helps analyze how textbooks and classroom discussions frame historical and contemporary issues of race, potentially reinforcing or challenging racial hierarchies. Legal and political language. CRT is particularly adept at analyzing legal and political discourse, revealing how racial prejudices and privileges are embedded in laws, legal decisions, and political rhetoric. Applying CRT principles to discourse analysis allows researchers to critically examine and unpack the complex ways in which language both reflects and constructs racial realities. By focusing on language and power dynamics, this approach not only illuminates the structural and systemic nature of racism but also offers a pathway to challenge these inequities through the strategic use of counter-narratives and an emphasis on intersectionality. Through this lens, discourse analysis becomes a critical tool in the ongoing efforts to understand and dismantle systemic racism in all facets of society. Conclusion: critical race theory's application to discourse analysis represents a pivotal expansion of its analytical capabilities, offering deeper insights into how race and racism are embedded in and perpetuated through language. By employing CRT principles, scholars can dissect the nuances of racial power dynamics and discourse, highlight the construction and impact of racial narratives, and emphasize the transformative potential of counter-narratives. This approach not only enriches our understanding of the linguistic construction of racial realities but also underscores the importance of an intersectional and context-aware analysis in advancing the discourse on race and equity. CRT's focus on systemic change and social justice drives its application in various fields, from media to education, providing a robust framework for challenging and transforming the pervasive structures of racial inequality. Frequently asked questions. What is critical race theory, CRT? Critical race theory, CRT, is an intellectual movement aimed at understanding and transforming the relationship between race, racism, and power. It emphasizes that racism is a deeply ingrained aspect of society, embedded in systems, structures, and relationships through legal means and cultural norms. What led to the development of CRT? CRT developed in the mid-1970s as a response to the perceived inadequacies of traditional civil rights approaches in fully addressing the subtle and ingrained nature of racism in the United States. It evolved from radical legal scholarship and critical legal studies, aiming to offer a more nuanced analysis of racial issues. Who are some pioneers of CRT? Key figures in the development of CRT include Derek Bell, Kimberlé Crenshaw, and Richard Delgado. These scholars critiqued traditional approaches to civil rights and developed foundational concepts and frameworks that challenge existing legal and social structures. What is the significance of intersectionality in CRT? Coined by Kimberlé Crenshaw, intersectionality is a central concept in CRT that examines how race intersects with other identities like gender, class, and sexuality. This approach helps to uncover complex configurations of privilege and oppression, recognizing that individuals experience discrimination in varied and overlapping ways. How does CRT use narrative to challenge racial stereotypes? CRT employs narrative and counter-narrative techniques to challenge prevailing cultural narratives that often perpetuate racial stereotypes and marginalization. By elevating the voices and experiences of racial minorities, CRT aims to construct alternative narratives that more accurately reflect the realities of racial oppression. What are the key principles of CRT in discourse analysis? In discourse analysis, CRT emphasizes that language constructs social reality, shapes perceptions of race, and maintains power dynamics. It explores how language is used in various contexts to perpetuate or challenge racial hierarchies, and highlights the importance of counter-narratives in empowering marginalized voices. How does CRT approach the analysis of legal and political language? CRT critically examines legal and political discourse to reveal how racial biases and privileges are embedded within laws and political rhetoric. This analysis helps to expose the racial assumptions that underlie legal and political decisions and the ways these frameworks sustain systemic racism. What role does media representation play in CRT discourse analysis? CRT analyzes media representation to understand how racial narratives are constructed and disseminated. This involves scrutinizing how media frames stories about different racial groups, which narratives are prioritized, and how these narratives influence public perception and reinforce racial inequalities. How does CRT address issues of racism in educational discourse? Through CRT, scholars analyze educational materials and classroom discourse to identify how race and racism are portrayed. This analysis can reveal biases in how historical and contemporary racial issues are framed, helping to challenge and reform educational content to provide a more equitable representation of race. What is the transformative potential of CRT in discourse analysis? CRT holds transformative potential in discourse analysis by not only uncovering the subtle and overt ways that language perpetuates racism but also by advocating for changes that can lead to greater racial equity. It pushes for systemic change by redefining problems and solutions in ways that challenge the status quo and promote social justice.